What's up, dudes? My name is Nick. Welcome back for another reading wrap-up for the 3 books that I read in the month of June. The first book that we're going to start with is Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. I finished the Shadow and Bone series. Personally, 2 reasons for the motivation for reading this series is 1, because of the Netflix series, which I'm very interested to read the book and then watch the series and see, compare and contrast and see things, see what my imagination conjured up and how that compares to the actual, video representation of it. And then the second thing is because it's a series that a friend of mine that we're kind of doing like a buddy read book club kind of thing together. She's interested in it too. And so we're reading it together, kind of, sort of. She's kind of behind, to be honest. But we're reading it together. We're both really enjoying it. And I was super stoked to just get into this. And I'm going to try and read Six of Crows before like the end of July, this present month. And then we'll watch the series at some point, hopefully in the future, depending on how much progress my friend has made. That is dependent on when I will start. But anyway, enough about that. This book is the conclusion, of course, to the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And it was fantastic. I talked about why I really liked this series, I think, in the previous reading wrap-up where I finished Ruin and Siege and Storm. I think this is the second book. And a part of it is because like our main character, the hero of this book, is not somebody who is like perfect and all powerful. She has flaws, she has weaknesses, and there is throughout the entire story like periods of doubt where like you really kind of think like maybe she's not actually going to succeed in the victory that she's looking for and that they want. And that's fantastic because, a perfect hero is kind of boring in my opinion. And a hero that has flaws and other, imperfections that cast doubt on whether or not she's going to win in her fight is something that I personally really, really enjoyed. So that's one of the main things that I really liked about this. About this book specifically, the way that this story kind of went and ended was not necessarily what I had expected. Because it's not like a perfect, flawless victory, which, considering that our main character is not a perfect and flawless human being or, hero, it kind of makes sense. So, everybody, I think, kind of comes out of the story kind of damaged in one way or the other. And, like, they ultimately succeed, and everything is good. They kind of got mostly the end result that they wanted, but it's not quite, the perfect victory that potentially might have happened, and I really like that, and it also does, set up, I already know the kind of some of the stuff that happens in future series, but just kind of the developments of this have all been really, really fantastic. And I think I said when I read Shadow and Bone and my wrap up for there too is like, for a book, this book, like the universe is actually pretty rich and deep. I really enjoy that aspect of it. I mean, it's really good. Just like the overall story of this was fascinating. It was thrilling. The magic and the fighting and all of the, interpersonal relationships and stuff like that were super cool. They were were relatively meaty, but not just like so convoluted and confusing that it was hard to kind of keep track of everything. So it's like a book that's complex yet also simple at the same time. It feels like we're a series, and it's really good. I personally really liked it. I do believe that I rated this book specifically a 5 out of 5 because it's just absolutely fantastic. And so, that was Shadow and Bone. That was a fantastic series. We're moving on to something that I picked up and I was pretty sure that it was going to be either bad or that I was going to like it. Like, I was going to rate it like a 3 or I was going to rate it like a 1. And so I was at the used bookstore and I saw Dracula versus Hitler by Patrick Shane Duncan. And personally, I was let down by this book because it did not deliver the Dracula versus Hitler action that the title suggested and that what the inner flap said was going to happen, in my opinion. Because this was not a book necessarily about Dracula versus Hitler. There was no fighting between Dracula versus Hitler in a direct way. Like, they didn't fight directly. It wasn't necessarily much like indirect fighting either, in really kind of like the amount and the visceral sort of way that I was kind of thinking or expecting. Really, this was just basically a historical fiction where like Romanian resistance fighters were fighting against the Germans and they were losing, so they enlisted Dracula to help them. And he said, okay, cool, because apparently Dracula is a patriot and he is defending Romania because that is his homeland and his people from German invaders. And Dracula does Dracula things, and he kills Germans and he drains their blood, and we don't really get a whole lot of detail on that, which is kind of unfortunate. And it's kind of just, it's not bad necessarily if you're looking, I think, for a historical fiction about like resistance fighters during World War II with the weird, interesting twist and the fact that like Dracula's included. That's okay. You know, and it's not really the most horrible book that I've ever read, but personally, my expectations going into it were one thing. This didn't deliver my expectations, so I rated it a 1 out of 5, because the title and I think the inside flap are kind of misleading as to like what the contents of this book are actually going to be. One of the things too I didn't really like about this is that the style of the book is written like it's a compilation of like documents and manuscripts from like a historian who's like researching this topic for the story of like Dracula in Romania fighting the Nazis. So the entries or the chapters in this book are kind of like from a spy's journal or from a book that wasn't published, or like an unpublished book. And then there's also towards the end like chapters that are supposedly from like Hitler's journal or somebody's journal. And the font that they're printed in is handwritten and it's really difficult to read. So that's not very fun. The changing of perspectives and writing styles is a little bit disorienting sometimes, especially with like the changes in perspectives and very slightly a change in like chronology, or maybe not chronology, but like kind of time. So that's kind of annoying. But I mean, it's definitely worth a read. You know, I found it at the used bookstore. The title and the cover and all stuff was super intriguing, so I picked it up and I gave it a try. I'm glad that I did. It just is a super kind of disappointing book for me. And so, finally, the boring book, which I personally found very interesting, but you know, maybe you don't. But this is a nonfiction read that I picked up, partly because I work at Whole Foods. And it's kind of interesting to listen to see what the CEO or the co-founder of the company thinks about capitalism and the role of Whole Foods in just the world, like global capitalist system. And so that is, of course, Conscious Capitalism by John Mackey, the co-founder of Whole Foods. And I personally really enjoyed reading this book because it's just, you know, an interesting thing to read stuff about like economics and things like that. You know, I learned some stuff, maybe, or I learned this guy's perspective on capitalism, because it's very interesting reading this in 2021 when this book was initially published in 2011, because I think that definitely people's perspective on capitalism, stuff like that, has really shifted and really, really soured, like a lot. There's a really, you know, strong movement against, you know, capitalism and like big businesses like Amazon and all that kind of stuff. And so reading a perspective, or basically a defense of capitalism, I guess, in a pure sense, or at least the way that this guy defines it, is very interesting to me. And the way that he's kind of set this out is like, I think that capitalism, the way that he's described it and the way that he defines it and the way that he tries to run Whole Foods, or tries to run Whole Foods now, is kind of like the way that I personally think of capitalism, why it's a good thing. And all of the things, and when he says all the things that people like don't like about capitalism right now is it takes advantage of people and is purely just driven for profit, is not actual like true capitalism. Mackey's going like, that's not real capitalism. This is real capitalism. Right? This is the way that it should be, and this is, you know, what's good for the world. And the way that he's laid it out, I don't disagree, but I think that it is really, you know, just like I think to a certain extent, like communism, you know, people who are very strong proponents for communism, it's like kind of like pie in the sky thinking, you know, completely sort of disregarding that I think the majority of human beings they have a craving for power that they will exploit whatever system, doesn't matter what it is, for their own personal gain and corrupt it and, turn it against the people who don't have the power. But just the base thing that I kind of think of that I think is like, human beings are selfish, greedy individuals, like innately, and no system that's run by humans is going to be run perfectly that treats everyone fairly. It just isn't really possible, because there's always going to be one person or a handful of people who are out for themselves more than anybody else. And, there's really no way around that. But Mackey in his book lays out an ideal functioning of capitalism, which I like. And I think it's a good ideal to strive towards. But, that is, of course, an ideal. And I know a lot of people, especially now, aren't going to agree with that. And one thing that I find really kind of funny, interesting in this book, which I think is completely counter to people's general sentiments in the present day, is that he lists Amazon as one of the companies that he sort of identifies as a company that is a conscious capitalist company. That they run their business consciously, that they're looking out for the best interest of every person who interfaces with their company, in the best way that they possibly can. And certainly people these days don't think that Amazon is a very great company. They actually think that Amazon probably is kind of an evil company, and it's kind of interesting how things change in 10 years. And I kind of wonder if I'm sure Mackey kind of thinks that Amazon as a company is probably equally as conscientious or conscious as they were 10 years ago, because, he sold the company, or he allowed the company to be bought by Amazon. So he probably still thinks Amazon's pretty cool. But it would be interesting to see what his perspective is on Amazon these days, personally. So those are the 3 books that I read. We concluded the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which is fantastic. I would rate the entire series 5 out of 5. And that is really the only highlight of my reading for the month, because Dracula versus Hitler was a drag, and I couldn't finish it as fast as I wanted to because I wasn't really enjoying it thoroughly, as I was reading it. At best, it was a 3 out of 5 kind of book, but the way that it ended was really bad, in my opinion. And so I rated it a 1 out of 5. And then I didn't give a rating to Conscious Capitalism previously, but I would rate it at a 3 out of 5, just because it's a solidly written book. I wasn't really bored throughout it. It presented some good ideas, some good ideals, I guess, idealistic ideas, and that stuff is valuable to a certain extent, whether you agree with it or you disagree with it. So those are the books that I read for the month of June. Let me know what you guys thought, the books that you read, any suggestions that you've got down in the comments below. Be kind of curious to see what you guys are thinking. And I will see you later in another video coming up, hopefully sometime in the future, if not next month. We'll see what I can do. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys all next time.